All right, welcome everyone to VSAT. We are very happy to have David Dillenberger here, who's going to present allocation mechanisms with mixture-averse preferences. Sadly, Uzi can't make it, so today there's no one officially looking at the chat. So if anybody has a question, feel free to just unmute yourselves and ask, or if you prefer to write in the chat, I can read it for you. And then Todd, Sarver, and Gershkov have very kindly agreed to be our panelists today. So they are the official people to ask questions, but yeah, I invite everyone to ask questions if they want to. I already want to advertise next week's talk. Next week is the last of our season, and it's going to be Tommaso Denti from NYU. So come back for that. All right, so David, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for coming. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I should apologize a bit. My screen in the computer cracked, so I'm using an alternative monitor, so I'm a little off in my position. And it's not a touch screen, so I may change some things, but with this, let's start. So this is a joint work with Uzi, Segal, and it's part of a research agenda. Oh, and by the way, if you have any question, just unmute and just ask. Part of a research agenda where we ask how taking into consideration agent preferences over procedures may affect the way we think about economic problems such as allocation mechanisms. In the previous paper, we talked about people who do not reduce compound lotteries, and here we look at agent who have mixture-averse preferences. So let's start just with the motivation. Suppose there are 10,000 kids, and they need to go to school. There are 10 schools of different quality, and in each school there is 1,000 seats. These are kids, so we don't need to discuss merit or things like this. And if they are all considered equal, it seems reasonable. And if they agree on the ranking of the schools, it seems reasonable that to give every kid an equal chance to be admitted to each of the schools. It looks like a good solution in the sense that it's egalitarian, in the sense that everyone gets the same lottery, and it's feasible. Clearly, if individuals preference over lotteries, not just the ranking of the out of the schools, but lotteries over the school is different, then this procedure need not be ex-ante efficient. But suppose not only the kids or their parents agree on the ranking of the schools, but also on their preferences over lotteries. If all are expected utility, then it will lead to an efficient allocation. But we are going to see that this is not the case if preferences are quasi-convex in the probabilities, which means that a mixture of two indifferent lotteries is inferior to the mixed one, and to the mixed lotteries, and we are going to see that there are many popular examples of such preferences. And what we ask is, what would be a desirable solution then? And more in general, what will be a good solution when people have other things. Very often people are kind of lose when it's just new objects, and I will make sure to explain everything here. So at the moment, I will explain what is each of the assumptions. So we are still in the overall agenda. So this is the basic model we are going to study and the main insights.
David,
so we're going to look at an economy.
David, sorry to interrupt, but you broke up for a while, a little bit. Do you have anything you can do to improve the connection?
No, that's the best connection I can have. I'm in the university.
Okay. All right. Let's hope for the best then.
I see. I apologize. Okay. So the basic model and main insights. So we are going to have an economy where there are n types of goods. They need to be allocated, one for each agent. All agents will have not necessarily identical, unlike the previous slide, they will have strict preferences over the basic goods, and their preferences will be strict quasi-convex over lotteries. And the first result would show that an ex-ante Pareto efficient allocation must give almost everyone a lottery over at most two outcomes, what I will refer to as binary lotteries. So even if our intuition is that similar people should get the same thing, in fact, even if all preferences are the same, then some identical agent necessarily will receive different lotteries. And we're going to see that this will give us a very easy condition to detect inefficient allocations. It will have some implication, if time permits, I will talk about them, some implication of how we can potentially use this insight to improve popular mechanisms. And you may, in the beginning, worry, oh, you talk about this funky, strict quasi-convex preferences, maybe it's hiding something. I would say that essentially all what I'm saying is true also under expected utility with some caveats that I make precise. We are going also to show the existence and characterize what we call an ideal solution. This is a solution that is not just ex-ante efficient, but a situation where everybody have the same preferences and all should be indifferent between what they get. So it's kind of a version of no envy. If everybody have the same preferences, then all the lotteries that are used, they need to be indifferent to one another. And lastly, now that probably I will not have time to talk about today, but I can ask, can full equality be restored by randomizing over these binary lotteries? We will see that this will depend on how agents view compound lotteries. Probably I will not talk about it today. Okay, so let's start with the details. The first order of business is to understand what do we mean by quasi-convexity. So the definition is simple. It says that if Q, it's written in weak preferences, but it says that if Q is indifferent to Q prime, then you prefer both and Q prime to the mix, alpha Q plus 1 minus alpha Q prime. So it captures aversion to randomization among equally good lotteries. This is the place where I wanted to use the board, but I don't have it, so ignore, you don't see anything. Let's just look at this table, at least a graph, just that I will demonstrate what do I mean by quasi-convexity. So think about the probability simplex. When you have three outcomes, R will be here the best, S will be the middle, and T will be the worst. I will put the probability of the worst one on the x-axis, the probability of the best one on the y-axis, and the remaining probability is that of the middle outcome. Every point here is a lottery, and I can draw indifference curves. Now, you know that in expected utility, indifference curves are both linear and parallel. Here, I want to generalize it, so linear indifference curve will be the boundary case, but I would allow to have difference curve to have the following shape. So the lower contour sets are convex sets. You may be indifferent between two lotteries, this one and this one, but all the line segments that connect them lie below the indifference curve. That's why the name Mixture-Averse preferences. Examples beyond expected utility. So the main example is the family of rank-dependent utility models due to Quiggin in 82 and Menachem Yaari in 1987 that also include cumulative prospect theory. In those models, risk aversion implies quasi-convexity. Okay, so we don't need to know the details of cumulative prospect theory, but it's a model where, or rank-dependent, people do like expected utility, but they kind of distort the probabilities. if the probabilities are distorted in some pessimistic fashion, then it will imply risk aversion, and the map of indifference curve will be quasi-convex. Machina in 1984 make a more general observation. He says that as typical in many applications in economics, where after you get a lottery, but before it is resolved, the individual can take action that affect his final outcomes, like in, for example, in insurance problem. So if the actions is sensitive to the probabilities, so Marx showed that even if all the underlying preferences are expected utility, the induced preferences over the optimal lotteries, where you take the optimal actions, will be quasi-convex in the probabilities. So looking at this way, quasi-convexity is more the norm rather than the exception in many economic problems. Experimental evidence, there are mixed.
Dodi,
Yes.
can I ask a question? So
Yes.
in these examples of these classes of preferences like Huygens and cumulative prospect theory, I mean, there is also kind of utility representation of these preferences, right? When you're talking about this class of quasi-convex preferences, they all also have some kind of utility representation?
Yes, so I will assume, so at the moment not, but of course I will assume that preferences are complete, transitive, continuous, monotone, and therefore they will admit a utility representation. But I just want to focus on the property, which is kind of the novel here that derives most of the result. I want to be as standard as possible otherwise, but only if you want have the novel feature is to look at quasi-convexity rather than expected utility preferences. Okay? So they will all have utility representations, and rank-dependent utility is a canonical example of preferences from that with risk aversion imply that their indifference curve looked that way. Experimental evidence, they are mixed. Usually there is support for quasi-convexity over gains and quasi-concavity over losses. I have other papers in which I look at preferences that are actually the opposite, are convex preferences. There is nothing holy or, that everything must be quasi-convexity, but, there is some evidence for that. And there are some nice behavioral features that distinguish quasi-convexity from others. So for example, it can accommodate aversion to probabilistic insurance together with risk aversion. So broadly, what is probabilistic insurance? You buy from me insurance, you pay me only half the premium, and then if a damage occurs, then I flip a coin. I either ask you, pay me the other half, and I will pay you back for your damage, or I will not pay you back. Don't pay me, but you suffer the loss. These are something that people seems to not to like, but in most standard model, it's actually implied by risk aversion. Quasi-convexity allows us to disentangle the two. Todd, who is here in the audience, had a very nice observation that quasi-convexity is consistent with the marginal willingness to pay for insurance being increasing at some level of coverage. So the idea is that if you are already covered 90%, you will be more willing to increase your coverage when you are only covered 10% and you want to go to 15%. Again, this is something that looks very plausible, but in most models require violation of risk aversion. Colin Raymond and I had some implication of quasi-convexity in the context of group decision-making. It's maybe a little less relevant here. So let me just to summarize, we have a behavioral property, and all what I'm going to do, all what I'm doing today, I will not tie my hand to any utility representation. We are going to be in the very, very basic assumption of preference relation, and all will fall or rise on this assumption. So first of all, we understand what this assumption says, I hope. You believe me that there are many models many popular models in unexpected utility that satisfy it. Expected utility, of course, will be a special case. If you want a very literature-driven motivation for this paper, I would say, look, cumulative prospect theory, it's used so heavily in behavioral economic, it may be interesting to see whether, take it to the problem, allocation problem, whether it makes us think differently about the issue. There is some experimental evidence and also some behavioral features that justify why we can look at quasi-convexity. Okay? So with that, let's go to the model. So we're going to have a model.
David, can I ask a more fundamental question?
Fundamental, yes.
Well, for understanding mostly for me. So the reason why we need lotteries in the first place in your sort of efficiency results is because of the goods indivisible. Goods are indivisible. Is that the reason?
No.
So if the goods were divisible,
it will be
then
probabilities.
Why would we use lotteries if we wanted to do, equal Pareto efficient allocation?
Say it again. I didn't hear you. I didn't understand.
Suppose goods are divisible, perfectly divisible.
It will be, the goods will be probabilities. What I'm going to do, I'm going to allocate probabilities. So the basic goods are not, but the goods that I'm going to allocate.
Okay, but
is probabilities that are divisible.
But the basic goods are indivisible.
About why the result before you saw the result. So maybe we'll wait for that and then ask it again. Okay, so we're going to have n basic goods. Think about n schools, 1 to n, at least 3. And they're going to have k units of each of the basic goods. So think about k seats in each school. And we're going to have nk individuals. Each individual I have preferences over lotteries over these goods, which are with strict preferences over the goods themselves. That means that for each agent I, there is a linear order over the goods themselves. And for each individual I, the preferences, as Alex says, will be nicely behaved. They will be continuous. They will be monotone with respect to their ordinal preferences, and strictly quasi-convex in probabilities. As I say, I will comment that most of the insight will go also with weakly quasi-convex if I allow some linear parts of the indifference curve or even everything linear. But for exposition, let's think about strict quasi-convexity. What is the solution here? The solution will be a list of n-dimensional probability vectors, Q1 to Qnk. So Q, the allocated to agent I. Each will have a lottery over the n objects, the n schools. And we have 2 feasibility requirements. The first requirement will say that every kid go to school. So for any individual I, if we sum over all the schools, the probability that this kid will go to school n, we get 1. The second condition says that each school will be filled. That is, for each school, if we sum over all the kids, that the probability that this kid will go to school, we get exactly k. Okay? Note that this condition, if you sum and look at the average, it implies that the average lottery faced by the participant is a uniform distribution over the n goods. 2 comments in order. First of all, you may say, hey, how can it be? Because the realization, there is some correlation here. It can't be that everybody will get the realization that they go to school 1. Luckily, we have, you want to think about the QIs as the marginal probability that each individual face. And we know from Birkhoff and von Neumann that for any Q, for any allocation like this, there is always a lottery over all possible variation of the allocation. Use the marginal probabilities in Q. So all this can be generated by lottery over matrix 0-1 matrices that says, Max, you go to this school, Alex, you don't go to this school. So we don't need to worry about correlation. We can only talk about the marginal probabilities. And second, I assume here that individuals are indifferent between units of the same type, so they're only interested in the overall probability of receiving a certain type. Okay, so I don't need to distinguish, take note on the exact seat that each kid get, but on the whether he accepted to that school or not. Okay, it will not be the case, for example, when I fly, I always fly aisle seat. So for me, aisle seat and a window, it's different things. So it's not just a seat in the flight. Okay, so that's what you look at.
Hey, Duty. Could I ask you a quick question about this? There seems to be a lot of symmetry here in that you've got like an equal number of each good. So
yes, but this I did, Todd. This is because I could always incorporate that by relaxing the assumption of strict order. So suppose, for example, there is two goods that you are indifferent between. So you can think about n in different, think about it as n in different classes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can get different number of the different goods.
Actually, sorry, let me finish my question and maybe you can tell me if this works. So imagine we had like, say, 100 people and we've got two schools. One of them has 10 seats and one of them has 90. So I can imagine you might say, well, then let's just break the 90 up into kind of 9 virtual schools. But then you're going to violate your strict preference assumption, right?
I know.
So how can we get around that?
Yes, but that's exactly the thing. So the strict preference is mostly for exposition. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at duplicate and just say, you know, you have strict, but there will be just in different classes. That's what I have in mind.
Okay, so this is just something you're doing in the talk, not something you need for your results to have the strict preference?
No, I don't need
Oh,
it.
okay. Very good.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start to talk with efficiency. And again, we are talking ex ante efficiency. So let's start characterize solutions that are feasible. That is, that satisfy these two conditions, 1 and 2. Every kid go to school, all schools are filled, and are oh, and by the way, just one thing that I want to say, we are going to look in the paper to the situation there are more kids than schools or more schools than kids. I will say something maybe about it later of more agents than schools, but for the talk, let's assume that just an equal amount. Okay? Okay, so we want a solution that are feasible and are ex ante Pareto efficient in the way we define Pareto efficiency with respect to preference over lotteries. There is no other solution in which some individuals are strictly better off and no one is worse off, based on their preferences over lotteries. And the first result, we said the following. Suppose preferences are strictly quasi-convex. Let Q be a feasible and Pareto efficient solution. Remember what is Q? It gives to each agent a probability distribution over the goods. Then, for any 3 goods, R, S, and T, there is at most one person that have these goods with positive probabilities. If I see a solution and I see that both Alex and Todd have a lottery that put positive probability on the same 3 goods, then I know it's not efficient. Corollary would say, so for example, if there is one guy who get lottery with full support, that suggests that all the others must receive binary lotteries. That's an implication. In general, the number of individuals who hold non-binary lotteries is bounded above by n choose 3. The total population is nk, so their fraction become arbitrarily small as k increases. Indeed, in the limit, everybody will get, in continuum, everybody will hold binary lotteries. When I say binary, it means either at most 2 outcomes with positive probability. Okay, so why this is true? It's very simple. So let's first of all assume that both Todd and I hold positive probability on R, S, and T, but Todd prefer R to S and I prefer S to R, then we can just exchange the probabilities between us and we will both be better off. So this is less interesting. The interesting case is that we all agree on the ranking. So here there are two. So think about two individuals. M and N is unfortunate because I denoted the goods, but there are two guys, Mark and Nancy, okay? And they both got some lottery. They may have different probabilities on different objects. So what you want to see here is the projection of their simplex on the face that have only these three outcomes, R, S, and T. So this is the lottery that M receives between the three outcomes. This is what N receives. And again, their preferences are strictly quasi-convex. So this is the indifference curve of M, and this is the indifference curve of N. Okay? Without loss of generality, let's assume, as in the picture, that the slope of N at the point is steeper or weakly steeper than that of M. Again, for the result, I don't even need differentiability. There can be the same, but let's assume just differentiability here because it just will make it a little more, the intuition clearer. So let's assume without loss that the slope here is greater than the slope here. So what we are going to do, we are going to pick a direction in between them, and we are going to do the following exchange. Todd will give up a bit from the probability of S and get in return a bit more from the probability of T and R, and it will take him to a point above his indifference, in a point above his original indifference curve. Alex will give him these probabilities, again, in the same rate, so he will have now more probability on S, but he will also be above his indifference curve. If this T epsilon is small, so we are still feasible, I didn't touch the other people, this couldn't be Pareto efficient. Okay? It's a very, very simple illustration of why this is happening. Again, I don't see even the chat, but if somebody has a question, just jump. So a bit about ex-ante efficiency. There are many no allocation mechanisms. For example, random serial dictatorship.
Sorry, Dudu, may I ask? So in case of expected utility, where this
Wait with
curves...
expected utility. With expected utility, I will talk in a second.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Give me 2 slides, I'll talk about expected utility. Okay? But note that in this case, if the slope is the same, then in any case, all this tangent is above. I just go on the line and both of them are better off. But wait with expected utility for a second. A bit about ex-ante efficiency. So there are many known allocation mechanisms. For example, random serial dictatorship. I'm randomly ordered the K and individuals. Let them choose in their turn the best good still available according to their personal ranking. It is known that the ex-post allocation of goods among agents in a serial dictatorship is Pareto optimal, but from the ex-ante stage, one implication that is not. And very easy to see it. Suppose everybody agree on the ranking of the schools, and suppose we have 10,000 kids and 1,000 schools. If you are in one of the first 1,000 to choose, you get your first best. If you are in the tier 1,000 to 2,000, you get your second best. 1,000, 2,000 to 3,000, third best. very easily you see that at least 2 kids will get positive probability on the same 3 schools, and we know it cannot be efficient. So the new thing here is not to say that random serial dictatorship is not efficient, but that all what you need to check is very simple. Preferences that are quasi-convex. It's a definition that is just behavioral definition that is easy to test. And I just want to look, I don't need to see the size of the probabilities, but only the supports. If I see 2 individuals with their support include positive probability on the same 3 goods, then I know I can do the trick as I did here and improve efficiency.
Sorry, I also have a question. So how, I was wondering in your context if you could not also take an ex ante perspective there. Like, I was wondering if in the end there's no way to get around, you know, the same problem as in the serial dictator problem, that ex ante, before you know your lottery, right, you don't know which lottery you get, so then you have positive probability of all the schools as well? Or do you think about yours in a different way? Is there no ex ante stage in that sense?
Yes, I just want to think about the situation that, you know, there is a social planner and he can give you take this lottery, Todd will get this lottery, he's not going to randomize. There is some way, procedure that he works with allocate lotteries, and you don't have in this place some uncertainty about what he will give you. But you just
can say, like, if you're red-haired, you will get this lottery, so there's no moment of uncertainty. So
yes, I don't want to have uncertainty on that version. It's just the uncertainty I want to capture is the uncertainty on you get a lottery on what school, on what good you will get in the end. Okay? So for Alex's question, this is what I say is to also under expected utility maximizer, but they need to have different cardinal utility. So if they have the exact same preferences, then of course I can do this trick and I can exchange probability on the plane, which is also indifference curve, and therefore nothing will change. But as long, basically what you see, this ugly object here basically says, if you take two guys, expected utility guys, and on these 3 goods, they have different, they have linear and parallel difference curve, but with different slope, then I can always do the trick. So in that sense, I can always find a direction in between and do some exchange that I improve the well-being of both and don't touch anything else. So in that sense, the result, but for in general or morally hold also under expected. Okay? Okay. So at the moment, I didn't put any restriction on preferences or on the connection between individual preferences. Let me be more precise. But it will be interesting to see what happens if individuals have the exact same preferences over lotteries. We know that give everyone the same thing will not be a good idea. At least it's natural to require that a just mechanism will yield identical agents equally attractive outcomes. So definition, suppose that all the individuals have the exact same preferences. I would say that the solution Q is ideal if it satisfies the following requirement. Feasibility, again, each kid go to school, all the schools are filled. Efficiency, there is no other solution Q tilde, such that each I weakly prefer Q tilde to Q, and at least some J strictly prefer Q tilde to Q, and equality in the sense that they are all indifference. So all the lotteries, because they have the same preferences, think about no envy, but if they have the same preference, it means that they must be indifferent between all lotteries. Okay? So result, suppose that everyone have the same preferences. So first of all, ideal solution exists. So I can always find a solution that, again, let me just emphasize this. It's not just efficient conditional on being equality, on being equal, but it's globally efficient and yet satisfy equality. Okay, so this is the content of this result. But when they have the same preferences, then I can say a little more about which lotteries will be used. So we have a bound on the number of different binary lotteries that used in any ideal solution. So it will be bounded above by this amount, the floor of n squared over 4. And those who get non-binary lotteries, there will be at most this number of people. Where these ugly numbers come from? Well, first of all, let's understand why there is a bound. Suppose Alex and I have the same preferences. Suppose without loss, we all agree that x1 is preferred to x2, blah, 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 preferred to xn. It can't be that Alex get a lottery between x1 and x2, and I get a lottery between x3 and x4. Because no matter what probability I will put, I will not be indifferent. I will prefer his lottery to mine. That suggests that there should be some overlap in the support of the lotteries. It can be that I get a lottery between x1 and x5, and Alex between x1 and x6. How come? I will just give Alex a bit more probability on x1, and by continuity and monotonicity, I will make sure that they are on the same indifference curve. Okay, so there must be some overlap. And these numbers is basically a way to write a bit more explicitly the following conditions. So for n equal to 2, basically I can divide the set of objects into two groups. Think about the good object and the best object, the good object and the bad object. And I look at all the possibilities to get pairs in a lottery between two goods, but I exclude the situation that there are lotteries that are in one side only between two goods or only between two bets. Okay? I thought to give a proof sketch for part 1, but maybe I will not go into it unless you are curious. I want to say something about it again. At the moment, all but assume that people have preferences. I didn't take any stand about how their preferences look like. Of course, if you say, for example, I commit to a rank-dependent utility with coefficient with some probability distortion, then I can do some optimization subject to constraint, and I will spit out allocation. But in this general level, I cannot say that this is the most what I can say. There are some situations, I should admit, I don't know, this is an upper bound, but I yet to find an example of a preference profile that I really need so many lotteries. What I want to say is that there are some situations that I need significantly less. So let's look at the following example. Suppose all agents have the same preferences, and without loss, suppose they all agree that x1 is preferred to x2, blah, 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 preferred to xn. Look at binary lotteries over xi and xn that are indifferent to xn minus 1. I would say that xn is terrible prize if the hyperplane through these points n xn minus 1 is above 1 over n, 1 over n, 1 over n. What I want to say by that any feasible allocation that give each individual a utility xn minus 1, at least xn minus 1, is not feasible. That means that I need a Actually, this is a typo here. It should not be xn. It should be any two object xn. No, it should be xn. I take it back. It should be xn because otherwise it will never be indifferent. Yes. So that means that all the lotteries used in an ideal solution will have to give xn positive probability to get feasibility. Okay? So if there are 10 schools, it means that all the lotteries that will be used will be of the form x1, x10, x2, x10, x3, x10. 9 lotteries compared to many more lotteries that I can do in the upper bound that I gave earlier. What the interpretation? Suppose there are more candidates than spots in all schools. So I think it's plausible to assume that not going to school is really bad. Let's call it a terrible price. Kids stay home is horrible. So in this situation, and again, this restriction here, it's based on preferences. It's something that I can see. Again, if I could draw, I could show you the condition easily with 3 goods, but I cannot draw, unfortunately. But this is a condition that you need to check. So in this case, if we can call xn stay home, and we all agree that it's a terrible outcome, so basically all kids will face a lottery over one school. So the lottery will not be to which school, but whether to go to school or not. And of course, those with positive probability on the best schools will more likely to be denied than those with positive probability on a lesser school. So what I want to say by that with more information about preferences, I can say more about which lotteries or how allocation will use. If with a functional form, I can do something more precise, but even the level of looking only at preferences, I can say something. In some situation, I can say, give even much lower bound on the number of lotteries that will be used. Okay. What I want to do next? Let me say something about the applicability of this result. I will take a bit the theorist hat off and talk a little about what can you do in this with this result. And then I will say if time permit, one more result. But I don't want to throw too much stuff. Just I want you to understand the main ideas. So note that in all what I said until now, we completely ignored the question of strategy proofness. We don't ask the question of whether people want to report their preferences truthfully. We instead focus only on the properties of the induced allocation of the lotteries for any given set of preferences. This suggests to us that for applied work, the insight that you get here are more relevant if preferences are either broadly known or if it's relatively easy to elicit them. Now, I would like to argue that ex-ante efficiency is very natural property to look at once individual preference over lotteries are taken into account. Whenever you think about matching, you apply to school or you apply to university or apply to something, there is always, you ask yourself, what is the chance that I will get in or not? So put all the, what we know about decision making under risk, under the carpet, and looking only at the ex post, efficiency seems to be a little limited. One reason why I believe people do that is because there is a known tension, at least under symmetry, between ex-ante efficiency and strategy proofness. This is, to my knowledge, first proved by Zhou in JET in 1990, and it proved Gale's conjecture, which says there is no mechanism that is symmetry in the sense of equal treatment of equal, ex-ante efficient, and satisfies strategy proof. So suppose you still want to adhere to strategy proof, and you want to see how can you use the result in practice. So again, Are there situations where our preferences are either broadly known or you can elicit them? I would argue yes. Not always, but sometimes yes. So there are situations where first getting information about cardinal ranking of alternative is possible. Cardinal ranking, if you know an expected utility, say, also will affect the slope of the indifference curve. And then you know that then we can do tricks like in the figure that I showed earlier. For example, ranking of school these days that I posted in the US News, it's not just the ordinal ranking, but also includes some quantitative parameters like total cost and student to faculty ratios. This is kind of more cardinal information that may affect your preferences. Also, very often the social planner has information about the people, characteristic of the agent, that he may conclude that one person have a stronger preferences for one school over the other. Okay, I'll give you an example. Stupid example, just for the case of the example. So both Todd and Alex want to send their kids to school in Israel for some reason. And let's assume that there are two schools, Jerusalem, the Hebrew University, and Tel Aviv University. And I don't want to be in trouble, but let's assume that the Hebrew University is a bit better than Tel Aviv. Just for this, I'm here now, so I need to say it. Now, for Todd, he says, look, whenever I send my kid, I need to fly to Israel. Then if I go to the airport and I take the taxi to Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it's marginal. But Alex lives in Jerusalem. He wants his kid to study in Jerusalem. If he not need to go to Tel Aviv, it will change all his life, all his day. So when I know the people involved, I can say that although they both agree that Jerusalem is better than Tel Aviv, but Alex has a stronger, more intense preferences for the two. And again, why I say it, because this will affect the shape of their indifference. Okay, so these are just situations there is some knowledge about how preferences look like. Even without it, I would say that you can go to elicit those preferences. So
before you move on, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I mean, I might push you a little bit on this because I feel like the fact that we have a lot of school choice programs suggests that, there are a lot of elements of preference that we can't know as a social planner. I mean, is there another direction where you think we could go if we say like, I mean, it might even be hard to get ordinal rankings here, let alone cardinal. Like, is there some other property that you could see giving up? Like, I see that you're talking about there's an impossibility, but is there some other property you might argue we should give up to try to gain strategy proofness, like symmetry or something else that might work?
Maybe, but I would like to argue, Todd, that yes, life is not simple, but I would like to argue that there is potentially a way to elicit those preferences. I don't say it's an easy task, but we can basically try to estimate parameters of specific functional form. For example, say everybody have rank-dependent utility with some probability distortion function, and we'll try to estimate it, okay? And why I say that I think it's feasible in the sense that such elicitation were done in many contexts, not just money. For example, in medical decision analysis, and people really did it and use it then to recommend to doctors some treatment. So at least a priori, it seems that the method that analog to those that are used in financial, health, recreational, ethical, and social decisions, there is no reason why they cannot be used in the domain of lotteries over apartment of schools. Again, you may tell me, oh, you want to bring the kids to the labs. I don't think about that. But in general, you can ask these questions. I can try to ask how it's important for you to get certainty equivalent between going to lottery over schools. Potentially, I can do that.
Sorry, I might be being slow here, so maybe you can clarify something. If we're going, it sounds like one element of what you're doing is you're going to assume a particular class of preferences. So maybe we should pin that for a second, that could be important, like if we assume rank dependent utility. But going on, kind of setting that aside for a second, is it right that effectively what you're saying is we can ask you certain questions and then we can make inferences about your preferences, And once we have that information, then we can decide the efficient allocation that satisfies the other properties you want. Is that right?
Even not fully efficient. I don't want to go all the way to efficiency, but I can do some changes on the margin. Let me give you an intuition, an idea how to do this. How to use it. Suppose you have some information, because you know the people involved will be called to elicit their preferences. How I can use that? I can start from an allocation that results from a strictly ordinary strategy proof mechanism. Each person, like in the current programs, give his list of preference over schools. Then I need, there is some allocation there, okay? But suppose I wanted to give both you and Alex the same chance to get to 2 schools. But now, if I have this knowledge, I can change the margin a little, do some improvements I show you in the previous figure. And if they are small enough, I will not give you all the way to efficiency, but I will improve a bit on the margin. And more importantly, even if you know that I'm going to mess with it, I will not sacrifice your report of your ordinal ranking. Okay, so this is not a complete thing, but this is something that you can, on the margin, help to improve on existing mechanism.
I mean, can we think about this, though, as you've kind of constructed a particular type of indirect mechanism? And just like when we think about like the revelation principle, we could say, what's the direct mechanism that corresponds to this? And, what properties does it have, and so on. This seems like an interesting thing to think about. That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do I want to do? I have 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, that's.
I have 10 minutes. Okay, I will just tell you very briefly that we are doing something about, we look at continuum economy, and then we look at the situation about can we get some form of no envy? Let's keep it. Let's keep it for now. So I want to do 2 things. I want to actually give some final message and then go to talk about something which is a little off the main theory they see, but I think it's good food for thoughts. Okay? So let's start with a little discussion on binary lotteries. So binary lotteries are used very often in economic, and I think mostly because they're simple. So the design of many experimental work offer comparison between them or between them and sure outcomes. And mostly when I ask people who do experiment why they do this, they say because otherwise people will have no clue what you ask them. So binary lotteries are simple. Theoretically, there is some works that suggest that binary lottery are good in the sense that they minimize complexity cost, or these are well understood binary acts that can be used as a tool for making difficult comparisons. I want to say that in our setting, that almost everyone should receive a binary lottery follow from assuming quasi-convex preferences. That is, I don't need to take expected utility or another function form and throw another thing into it, just to go to the very, very basic, to the level of preferences. So if I want to really sell the paper, but in a way that I don't want to do, I can say this gives you some foundation to why binary lotteries are good, because people have, in the level of preferences, they have quasi-convex preferences. But more importantly, it gives us a very simple necessary condition that can be used to assess whether an allocation of lotteries is ex ante efficient or not. It seems to me that as a social mechanism, binary lotteries are also attractive because if people look for information about the potential outcome before the lottery is played. So suppose you're admitted to 10 schools, you know the ranking, but you want to send your kids to school, you will go to visit all of them. And I tell you, don't worry about visiting 10 schools. Look only at 2. So it may be even easier or make your life simpler, but you need only to check 2 schools. Okay, so this is just a quick thing about binary lotteries. So let me conclude with something which is not in the formal in the formal setting, but I think it's a nice food for thought. So we saw that if preferences are strictly quasi-convex, then giving two identical agents the same interior outcome must be inefficient. Instead of equality in outcomes, allocation mechanism will seek a weaker notion of equality, where identical agent will be indifferent between their respective outcomes. Okay, and this is indeed the conclusion from the first two theorems. And this is usually when we write an IC constraint, we want your utility to be greater than something. We never ask where this utility comes from what allocation. But I would like to argue that only from introspection that indifference between the outcome does not imply indifferent to the procedure used to allocate these outcomes. Suppose, for example, I ask, again, Alex and Todd, whether they prefer to school A or school B, and they say, well, both indifferent. And then I say, okay, Alex, you'll go to A, and Todd will go to B. And then Alex said, wait a minute. Maybe Dudi have some private information regarding the school, and he has some bias to do favor for Todd, okay? And the fact that he gave him suggests that there is something here that I learned something from that Dudi gave the B to Todd, so maybe I'm not efficient anymore. I mean, why get something different than me? And you see it very, very often with kids. You ask two kids whether you want this candy or this candy, and they say, we don't care. You give one this candy, you give the other candy, and they start to shout at one another. Why do you shout at one another? You just don't care. People just don't like that someone else gets something different. They feel that they are mistreated. They say, fine, there is a way to avoid this potential mistrust, is that everyone will face the same lottery over the allocation over the lotteries. So it's related to what Julie asked me earlier. Now I will say, okay, there is lotteries A and B. I'm going to flip a coin. I will give you A with probability half and B with probability half. So any bias and inside information about the school become useless if the binary lotteries are allocated as a lottery. So you say, great, is this a good way to go? Well, now you have lotteries over lotteries, and this will depend on how people think about compound lotteries. If, as is standard in economic, all what people care about is the overall probability distribution over final outcomes, then they will perceive a compound lottery as a simple lottery over them. So they will just compute the overall probability of receiving each final outcome and treat this as the lottery they are facing. This is known in the profession or in the decision theory group as a reduction of compound lotteries axiom. But if preference over simple lotteries are strictly quasi-convex, everybody will reduce their lotteries. We know from the feasibility constraint that then the average lottery will be uniform distribution over all the school. We know this is actually not a good idea. It may be that both of them, both Todd and Alex, will be worse off if we go to that direction. But if individual instances satisfy a condition that's called compound independence, then there will be indifference between the compound lottery and the additional lottery. So what is compound independence? It basically says that if you're indifferent between receiving either Q or Q prime, then you'll be indifferent to replace Q with Q prime in any compound lotteries. Remember, these are lotteries over lotteries. If you get a compound lottery in which one of the outcomes is Q, you will be indifferent between that and with the same lottery when the final outcome instead of Q is Q prime. Okay? All recursive preferences that you write down will satisfy, almost all recursive preferences that you write down will satisfy this condition. So if Alex and Todd are indifferent between A and B, they also will be indifferent between a lottery between A and B. So it will not be able to improve their welfare, but at least if people satisfy compound independence but not reduction, then you can guarantee full ex-ante equality among agents without reducing their welfare. And again, this is just food for thought. This is something that it's not in the formal model. We don't talk about compound lotteries, but that's all what I want to say today. And the time is exactly 7 p.m., so I'm golden. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so now we have a little bit of time for discussion in case there are any other questions. So I'll give first the possibility to the discussants to say, yeah, if they have any last questions or any comments to make. Yeah, whoever wants to start.
Todd, do you want to start or shall I? Okay, so I have a couple of questions. So first, the first result, I think it was theorem 1, basically gives some necessary conditions of efficient allocation, right? I think my question is
Yes,
how far it is.
Yes, go ahead.
So how far it is from sufficiency? Because I mean, if we want to find what are the set of all efficient allocations in this kind of scenario, okay? I mean, your result is very elegant and it tells us something which is obviously not efficient, okay? Right? If we have an allocation where more than 2 agents are getting lotteries with positive probabilities on 3 goods, okay? But I'm sure that there are some allocations in this class that are still inefficient, right? So the question is how far this condition from sufficiency.
So I don't know in this level of generality. When I put no restrictions almost on preferences and just assume that they are quasi-convex and increasing. I think the main point here will be not to say the main contribution here will not to say what is efficient, but to say what is not efficient. For example, that if our intuition, and again, that's how we started all this, if our intuition suggests that, well, identical people should get the same chances to everything, in fact, this is not a good idea to go in this class of preferences. So it's very difficult to give sufficient here about, I don't know how to answer that.
Okay, fine, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, another question I had was, so if I think about indeed the problem that you described of matching, say, students to schools, okay, if I think from the perspective of parents that's supposed to report the ranking of the schools, okay, and let's assume that they're non-strategic, okay, they report truthfully, but at the moment of their report, they also know that their location will depend on what other parents will report. So in other ways, there is already some kind of built-in uncertainty that depends on the reports of the others. Okay, so
yes.
I was wondering if kind of the graphical illustration that you showed to show this kind of the intuition behind this theorem, whether it will also work or if it can allow to say something if we have already some kind of background risk which is not under control of the designer, of the planner.
Yes, so I believe yes, because, and again, this is, to get the exact lotteries will be obviously very, very difficult. But this is also the case in auction, right? When you submit a bid, you want to ask what is the, what is the types of the other bidders, right? and what they're going to do. This will be a combination of all this. If you have a pretty good idea about, we are in a small group and you kind of know, suppose people know one another, but the social planner does not know, so this will go away, right? Your example. But yes, I think in practice, whatever there is the probability, there is the risk in the mechanism itself. For example, the order that people choose. There is the risk that come from what are the other types and what they're going to do. I would like to argue that in the ex-ante point of view, all should be taken account when we think about the lottery that you are facing. But I understand that these are a little different in the sense that this is something that is in the mechanism and the social planner can choose, and there are some things that are just out of his hand, just about what others were going to do.
Okay, and so the last question, and then I will let Todd to ask. But so when I'm thinking about implementation of this kind of allocation, so I was wondering if one can implement some kind of efficiency by introducing kind of a market where agents can exchange or trade their probabilities for different allocations, for different schools, right? If you start with, say, equal allocation of all schools to all agents, but then you allow them to trade probability of at one school to probability at another school, whether in these kind of preferences, the agents will get to efficient allocation. So it's some kind of like whether in these kind of preferences with this kind of quasi-convex preferences, some kind of second welfare theorem supposed to hold, because then,
yes.
I mean, in this sense, kind of then the recommendation will be just, give them the allocation and allow them to trade. And, the outcome
Yes.
of this trade
So the answer is yes. So the answer is no. Why
Okay.
no? And you may ask, why do you even look? Why, for example, you didn't look at no envy? We know it's very easy. How we are going to do that? They will start. We'll give everyone the same endowment, the middle. We'll open it to trade. We know that that the market equilibrium is efficient. If we start with the same endowment, it's no envy. We are great. But this is assumed that the preferences are nicely behaved. In fact, we don't know with convex preference, and when you have examples, even in the continuum, they may not be equilibrium, definitely not with a finite number of goods. So there may be not equilibrium. The second welfare theorem says that preferences the upper contour set must be convex sets.
Yeah.
I cannot use, so all the result here in some sense, even in the continuum, we needed to derive in our bare hands in some sense, in the sense that we couldn't say, existence followed by, some market result, because I cannot use the second welfare theorem here. I saw that there is some issue with my connection, right?
Yeah, but I could understand you at least.
Yes, yeah. So the implementation will be difficult in terms of market. We started thinking about implementation. There will be a very simple implementation in one case. In the case that everybody have the same preferences, and everybody know that everybody has the same preference, but the social planner will not know. How are we going to implement?
Hello.
It finally happened.
So the
Yeah.
connection finally, got to him.
Person. So I think I'm talking to myself.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. 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 It's gone.
I
I think he disconnected. Maybe he's trying to connect again.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
he's going
yeah.
to come back. We
I
can wait a
think
minute.
we
Otherwise,
should let him finish. Yes.
David, you're back. You're looking less laggy.
Isn't it amazing that you go to the university and stay until late? Because at university, the internet connection is stable, you know?
Maybe they shut it down when everybody goes home.
Yes.
The
To
guy
save on
who's, like,
electricity.
running it manually.
I
The
think
only thing I
it's
can suggest
So let me
is
try it. If you what I say,
Maybe you
say it
could
again.
turn off your video.
I will just summarize what I said.
you can come to my office.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I just summarize what I say. Alex, implementation, we cannot do using a market precisely because second welfare theorem will not work. We do have an idea how to do implementation. It's actually very trivial in a situation that everyone have the same preferences. Everybody know that they have the same preferences, but the social planner does not know. How to do implementation here, it's an open, for a more general thing, it's an open question that I have been thinking about it recently, but I don't know. I don't yet have something smart to say.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, maybe we, Todd, give you the opportunity to also say something or ask a final question.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll ask a quick question so other people can jump in. I'll just second, like, I think this is interesting, Judy, that you're moving toward implementation, because I like that in what you've presented now, you talk a lot about efficiency, but that seems like a very natural next step. So I'll ask another more kind of specific question about the results you have now. So your second theorem, am I understanding correctly that if we had expected utility, in this case where everyone has the same preference, we would just give everyone the uniform distribution over the different outcomes, right? I'm just curious, does anything interesting pop out in other cases with linear indifference curves? Like if we look at betweenness or something, is that also still going to be the case? Or is there anything interesting to say in kind of other quasi-convex settings, but where it's not strictly quasi-convex?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in betweenness, if in 1/n they all have the same, so betweenness, for those who don't know, it's a class of preferences that keep the linearity, but of preferences, but necessarily parallel. In this case, if they have the exact same preferences, I lost you again.
No, you're okay.
Yeah.
You're
Do you
okay.
hear me, Todd?
Yeah, we got.
Ah,
Maybe you lost us.
Oh. You were in a second ago.
David,
Yeah.
why don't you try taking video out? You don't need to show slides anymore. So I would just take video out and just do audio. I don't know if you heard me.
no, you're all
I think he posted a message
frozen.
telling he has issue with connection.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when he comes back, we just tell him to go to audio only. Yeah, which is probably done himself.
Babam. Didn't work.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you don't need to show slides, so it's okay.
If you can hear us. Yeah, he's gone again.
Poor Julia, I believe you have it every week, this issue, right? In some way or another. No?
Mostly it's going smoother than this.
No, David, I'm afraid that's not true. I think it's your university who takes the wooden medal for
Alex, take note. I'm on
performance.
sabbatical. It's his university. I'm just a guest.
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't have it. I mean, I could have guessed
Yeah,
where you are,
but I think it will be a little impossible because I barely hear you and the connection is really bad. I'm really apologize. Todd,
All right.
I promise you an answer privately. Julia, I just can't. I hear now voices here. It's very
Okay,
difficult.
let's just wrap up at this point, and yeah, but thank you so much for doing this. Most of the talk was very clear and understandable.
No, the talk was fine, huh, David?
Yeah.
The talk was fine.
And yeah, thank you so much to Alex and Todd for being our panelists. And yeah, come back next week, everyone, for Tommaso Denti, and we'll stop the official part.
Thank you,
now.
David. Thank you.